expensive ad campaigns, community outreach, special programs. The Canadian Forces has been working to boost diversity in the ranks, but 2 years after setting new recruitment targets for women, Aboriginals, and visible minorities, the military is falling far short of meeting its goals. Let's take a look at our hot sheet. Figures provided to Power and Politics from the Department of National Defence show 2 years ago, the Canadian Forces set the target for women at 25%, but it's far behind at less than 15%. And the military has only 1 more year to hit the targets. The goal for Aboriginals is 3.4%, but they now make up just 2% of the military. And visible minorities should make up 12% of the military, but only make up less than 5%. So as it stands now, white men make up most of the military. So why is the Canadian Forces having trouble attracting a workforce that reflects Canadian society? And what can be done to improve those numbers? Does it even matter? Joining me now from Toronto, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Defence, Chris Alexander, NDP military procurement critic Matthew Callaway, and Liberal defence critic John McKay. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Happy to.
Thanks, Hannah.
Now, Chris Alexander, I want to start with you. The Department of National Defence has until next year to get up their hiring for these target groups. Now, we just saw how far off those numbers are. How can they do it now?
Well, we want Canadian Forces, we're committed to having Canadian Forces that reflect society. That's why we have these ambitious targets, and that's why we're promoting the career to all parts of Canadian society. And we have made progress, but let's keep in mind, these aren't quotas, they're targets. And in the case of Aboriginal Canadians and visible minorities, people have to self-identify. So we may be doing better than actually the statistics show. For instance, on Aboriginal Canadians, where we know we have over 2%, we also have, as part of the regular force and the primary reserve, the Canadian Rangers in the North and Arctic, which are overwhelmingly Aboriginal. And which represent, themselves close to 4% of the force. Now, whether the members of the Rangers self-identify as part of these surveys, I don't know. On women, we have an excellent story to tell. There are over 10,000 members of the Canadian Forces who are women. There is no exclusion to the participation of women in any profession, including the combat arms. That's why we had people like Captain Nicolas Goddard killed in Afghanistan, leading a reconnaissance squadron in Kandahar. And this has not always been the case in Canada, and it is still not the case,
but you're
even
not hitting,
in like-minded democracies.
You're not hitting your own targets.
Well, we are making a lot of progress. Keep in mind, Hannah, we in 2010, we had a target of 19% women. We're close to 15%. We've raised the bar by 6%. We've only had 2 years of recruitment. We only recruit 4,000 or 5,000 people a year. Even if we recruited 50-50 in those years, it would be hard to meet the 25% target. We want a demanding target. We want an ambitious target, but we're not going to hit it overnight.
So you're satisfied with the results so far?
No, I think we can do more, but I think we need, as Canadians, to understand that we have done well. We have excellent women. They are submariners. They are fighter pilots. And countries like Australia recently invited a delegation of Canadian Forces members, mostly women, to come and explain to the head of their Australian Defence Force how we do it, because they still restrict, up until recently, the participation of women in certain professions, and that's the case with many other NATO countries. So we're ahead of the curve, but there's still a lot more we need to do to make sure the Canadian Forces reflect all the talent, all the potential that is out there in Canadian society. And obviously, when it comes to new Canadians, this is the fastest changing part of Canada's demography. And we do have some catching up to do here, though we have made progress, and we are determined to continue doing that.
So, Matthew Callaway, I want to come to you for a second. They have the ads, they have the outreach. What else can the government do?
Well, I think, first of all, that if the Canadian Forces want the support of the Canadian population, it's imperative that they reflect the diversity of this country. I would look at those statistics and come to the opposite conclusion of Chris. If you take the Rangers out of the mix, then this government is doing far more poorly on recruitment of Aboriginal folks than the statistics would suggest. And similarly with women, that if you look at the roles that women have currently in the Canadian Forces, many of them are still traditional roles for women. And so I think those statistics are masking a larger problem that exists with the diversity and employment equity in the Canadian Forces. And what the recent effort to recruit by the Canadian Forces of the Aboriginal population, I think, betrays is the lack of meaningful efforts to make connections with the communities that they're seeking to recruit. And in fact, with respect to the Aboriginal population in particular, this is a government that puts itself in conflict with the Aboriginal community time and time again, and we have the recent federal court ruling on Attawapiskat as evidence of that. That's a scathing indictment of this government's response to real existing problems in the Aboriginal community. And so long as we have a government that puts itself into conflict with the communities that they're trying to recruit, they will never meet appropriate targets and will never provide equal opportunity to these communities to participate in the Canadian Forces.
John McKay, what do you think the government can do to get those numbers up?
Well, certainly they can do a little bit better in their advertising campaign. At least they pulled the ad with respect to recruitment of Aboriginals. I guess that's good news. At least did a focus group and pulled it and realized that it was offensive to the point of almost comical in its stereotyping. So what concerns me is that that should even be happening in a recruitment ad. It shows a level of insensitivity to that particular group, which is deeply disturbing. And I imagine it's not that difficult to therefore project into the other groups, i.e. visible minorities and women, that maybe the military is not as in tune as it should be with what are appropriate recruitment techniques. I can only speak to, say, in my own riding, where we have pretty well every people group known to mankind in the riding, and yet I'm not. Maybe I should be, but I'm not aware of any of the aggressive activities by the Canadian military to recruit from what would be an obvious pool of people. So I think they got a long way to go. I like Matthew, think that the statistics actually mask a deeper problem. I know when we've been traveling as a committee, I and others have asked from time to time that a lot of the people around here seem to look like us. So why is it that we aren't doing a better job?
No, I don't have a lot of time here. I want to get through really quickly through three of you, and I want to start with Chris Alexander first. Why does it all matter?
Well, it matters because the Canadian Forces, to project our values, to protect, defend Canada and defend international peace and security, have to reflect Canada. And Canada is changing. The work of the Canadian Forces is changing. So we need these groups to be fully reflected in the force. Now, it was a Liberal government that shut down the regular force units, the last regular force units in many of Canada's large urban areas. That is a problem. And we don't recruit as strongly because there aren't regular force units in our big cities. But you can't blame the Liberal government now. You're in power. You can get your numbers up, right?
I
actually can, Hannah, because these trends with regard to new Canadians and so forth
but it's your
are determined by dynamics that are shaped over decades.
But is it not your responsibility
now
to get those numbers up? You've been in power since 2006.
Absolutely. But when the main regular force army unit is in Petawawa and not anywhere near the GTA, many of the new Canadians who've come to the GTA don't have a direct experience of the Canadian Forces. We're trying to give them that through advertising, through all kinds of outreach programs. But we need your help in the media, and we need the help of my colleagues in urban ridings, like Matthew and John, to make those links even stronger. For Aboriginal Canadians, we're celebrating the War of 1812 and our military history, which has every step of the way had an Aboriginal component central to it. And that remains the case today. I think the numbers are still quite strong, and we recognize it. When the 90th anniversary of the Battle of Vimy Ridge took place in 2007, there was an Aboriginal Canadian soldier leading the service.
Okay, I'm so sorry. I do have to end it there. We ran out of time. I want to thank Chris Alexander, Matthew Kelway, and John McKay for joining us on this topic today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Hannah.